welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 508, and today's date is November 3rd, 2014. And the title of this episode is, Are the Central Bankers Pushing Ukraine to Start the War Once Again? Before I get started, just wanted to mention one little thing here. By accident, I sat on my headset. I kind of crushed it. I went out and I bought a new one. I couldn't find the same one, so I might sound a little different while I do the broadcast. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, we understand that Eurozone is completely falling apart. Things are not going well there, and we see the Eurozone manufacturing activity expanded slightly slower, and guess what? It is not doing well whatsoever. We have to remember France, Italy, Spain, all having major problems. Germany's up a little bit from September, August, but we see the entire Eurozone having a huge amount of troubles. A lot of countries are in a depression, recession, and they can't get out of this. Now, here in the United States, what are we seeing? We're seeing the ISM manufacturing surges to 3-year highs, ignores PMI. We're seeing two contradictory reports here from the PMI and the ISM. But what we see here is new orders have fallen. And what else have we seen? Well, GM is up to their old tricks once again. They are channel stuffing the lots right now to make it look like their sales are better than ever. Yes, some of their cars did do much better, but Cadillac is down by negative 8%. And we can see year over year they're down at negative 4.6%. And this brought GM to their sales increased to about 0.2% in a positive range. So they're not doing that well, but what they did is they stuffed the lots with cars. This is their old trick and their gimmick that they use, and we can see right now there's 94 days worth of supply on the lots right now. And again, they're going to try to move these cars later on by offering gimmicks, by offering incentives, by offering whatever they can to get that person to purchase that car. But they have to make the manufacturing and everything else look good. And this is why they go ahead and they channel stuff pretty much everything. And we talk about real estate quite a bit now, and we understand that real estate is kind of imploding on itself, not doing very well. And we can see right now that construction spending dropped 0.4% in September. Construction spending fell for the second month in a row. And we can see right now they expected a 0.7 rise, and it just didn't get there. It dropped 0.4%. So this is not going well. And this is the fourth miss in a row for construction spending. And we can see real estate as we move into the fall, going into the winter, things are not going to get better. They're going to get worse. But we have to remember, start of the new year, we understand that Freddie and Fannie have this new program where people can put 3% down. They don't have to have the down payment, and a lot of the builders will compensate them for the rest of it, and we're going to have to see how this plays out as we go along. I really don't think it's going to help. I think it's going to completely fall apart, and I think the American people just don't have the funds, don't have the credit. They were wiped out in 2008 and just couldn't bring themselves back to where they were. Now, we see the National Association of Realtors today admitted that the first-time homebuyers plunged to the lowest level in 27 years. With less disposable income and thus fewer assets, today's youth is finding it ever more difficult to build up a solid credit history. Fewer can afford to buy homes and start families instead, choosing to live in their parents' homes as they were when they left for college. They come back from college. They have this huge amount of student loan debt. They can't find that work, and the last thing on their minds right now is purchasing a home. But again, the government, the Fed, they're doing everything they possibly can to get these people to purchase these homes, and it's starting to fall apart now. It's starting to crumble. The mortgage applications are in a huge decline. They're imploding on themselves, and we see things are not getting better whatsoever. Now, what's very interesting is that the Federal Reserve Board of Governors in Washington, D.C. has farmed out much of its quantitative easing programs to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York since the financial crisis of 2008. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York has in turn contractually farmed out a hefty chunk of the logistics of that work to J.P. Morgan Chase in the last 6 years. And gee, that's kind of strange. Sitting quietly on the Federal Reserve Bank of New York's website is a vendor agreement and other documents indicating that J.P. Morgan Chase holds all the mortgage-backed securities that the New York Fed has purchased under its various quantitative easing programs. As of last Wednesday, the figure was at $1.7 trillion. So that is very, very interesting. Now, Italy is out there, and they're saying we should do the same thing that Hungary did. We should say, you know what, we're going to leave the European Union. And Matteo Salvini has said it, that it's time to follow Hungary's example and threaten to leave the European Union. Now, what's very interesting is Chancellor Angela Merkel has signaled she would rather see the UK leave the EU than compromise the free movement of immigrants. The UK is nearing a point of no return as British Prime Minister David Cameron attempts to renegotiate the terms of the country's EU membership, targeting the freedom of movement. This was Merkel's first hint that the UK's exit from the Union is a possibility. Cameron earlier said he wants to renegotiate the country's EU membership before going through a referendum on the subject, with the European principle of freedom of movement at the very heart of my renegotiation strategy for Europe. Merkel has stressed that her support for UK membership could be reversed if Cameron pursues migration reform. So we can see all these countries are looking at the European Union and they're saying, maybe we should actually leave this. And we can see right now, this whole thing might just completely fall apart. Now, Spain, as we know, when countries become desperate and they need to bring in revenue, they start to do really strange things, and they tax pretty much everything. We see Hungary out there trying to tax the internet. The people spoke up. They had hundreds of thousands of people protesting, and they said, absolutely not. We will not allow this to happen. And Hungary, they kind of backed down. But Spain's government, they're out there, and they have a huge amount of debt and a really weak economy, and they're looking at this and they're saying, maybe we can raise some revenue by taxing anyone that has a link to copyrighted information. And this goes on to say that the Spanish government recently passed an intellectual property law that will impose taxes on websites and blogs that post a snippet and or a link to copyrighted material. This includes taxing Google, whose entire platform is based on linking to outside content. As such, the legislation is officially called the Google tax, but will tax any website that links to Spanish media stories. And every single government seems to do this when they're in deep, deep trouble and they need to bring in revenue. Look what the United States is doing. They're going all over the world, having all the banks come in compliance and say, hey, report anyone that has more than $50,000 in the bank because we need to bring in this revenue and we are desperate. Now, as with Obamacare, everyone realizes how I kind of feel about it, and it's really not for the people. It's not affordable, even though the title of the legislation is the Affordable Care Act. It's far from that. But what we're seeing right now is the premiums are going way, way up. And of course, the Obamacare website is not reporting this until after the elections, and if they're making a lot of excuses. But what's very interesting about all of this is that the majority of last year's Obamacare customers aren't planning to purchase their coverage again in 2015, according to Bankrate survey. 51% of respondents in a survey of last year's Obamacare exchange customers don't plan to purchase an exchange plan this year. Higher premiums are keeping most customers away. 43% said higher insurance rates are the biggest concern about buying Obamacare coverage once again, or the Affordable Care Act, which it is not. It's amazing with all this legislation, they always use the titles that mean the opposite of exactly what they do. The Patriot Act. There's nothing patriot about the Patriot Act whatsoever. Affordable Care Act. It's not affordable whatsoever. It is not a benefit for the people, and more people are starting to wake up and realize this, and they're scratching their heads going, okay, now what do we do for health insurance? Because as we know, if you don't take Obamacare, you're going to be penalized, taxed, and if you do take it, you're going to be paying a high premium, and you have high deductibles, and this is not a benefit for anybody. Now, we understand the grand jury is going to make a ruling come this November, very, very soon. It's coming up very quickly. And what we realized is that the 37-mile no-fly zone around Ferguson was implemented after the shooting of Michael Brown, and this was done by the police because they didn't want the press to fly over the area whatsoever, so they restricted the airspace. So they pretty much removed the First Amendment for pretty much everyone. And we saw how the press was treated on the ground. They were put into these little areas saying this is where you can report from, and by accident they would be fired upon, they'd be beaten on, and of course this was no accident. This was all done on purpose. Now, as we know with Ebola, we understand that the West African countries, they have a huge amount of natural resources. They were recently discovered, and all of a sudden Ebola broke out in Senegal, Guinea, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Congo, Nigeria, Uganda, Mali, and it just goes on and on and on. And we understand the United States is bringing in about 4,000 military soldiers to put up these Ebola treatment centers. And we can see right now that the problem is not the treatment centers, and the people down in Liberia are saying that we don't know if this is really going to help the situation whatsoever, because the people are afraid to go to any one of these centers, because as they believe once they entered these centers, they've come out with Ebola. When they went in, they were healthy, and there was a doctor in Liberia that reported this. So they're a little bit hesitant going into these treatment centers down in Liberia. Now, what's very interesting is that, of course, the United States will not ban the travelers from West Africa, but what we're seeing is Australia and Canada have banned visas from the West African nations. Very interesting. And again, Obama is completely against this. He will not do this. Canada said authorities would not process any visa applications from individuals who had been in Ebola-affected nation within 3 months prior to the date of the application. A statement said immigration authorities would also not issue new visa applications or process existing applications from foreign nationals intending to travel to an Ebola-affected nation. And again, we have to go back to that whole entire theory of the military is down in this region, and we have to remember the UN ambassador to Liberia was out there saying the soldiers are there not to remove the government and have an overthrow of the government, but they're there to help. And it's very strange that this person would say this at all, and we really have to look at this and see what's going on. And we see the UK is bringing down soldiers, the United States is bringing down soldiers, and we're going to have to see how this plays out as time goes along here. Now, what's very interesting is that New York City is going to have a full-scale Ebola pandemic drill, and it's going to go live November 13th. A massive 2-year-long pandemic continuity exercise is nearing the stage 3 of 5 on November 13th, going live in New York City and other locations according to new documents. FEMA officials have been caught telling role players during a live webinar session that FEMA plans to use people's fears of Ebola and what has been reported in the news to drive this real-time full-scale event. The federal executive boards in New York City and Northern New Jersey, in partnership with FEMA Region 2, the Department of Health and Human Services Region 2, Securities Industry and Financial Markets Association, and the Clearinghouse Association are sponsoring the drill. So this is what's going to happen on November 13th, Pandemic Influenza Wave 1 full-scale exercise. November 20th, Pandemic Influenza Wave 2 full-scale exercise. December 1st through the 3rd, Pandemic Influenza Recovery. And we can see how this is all playing out, and we're going to have to watch this very carefully as these dates approach, because as we know, whenever there's a drill, something live seems to happen in this time period. Now, what's very interesting is that the mainstream media right now is not reporting on Ebola and any new cases. The Associated Press and other press outlets have agreed not to report on suspected cases of Ebola in the United States until a positive viral RNA test is completed. And this is coming from Forbes' David Kroll, an adjunct professor of Duke University Medical Center. In other words, the mainstream media has agreed not to report on any suspected Ebola cases at this time. Now, down in Nigeria, we understand Boko Haram was created to scare the Nigerian government into allowing the United States military soldiers into the country to help fight terrorism. And of course, they ginned up Boko Haram just like the Islamic State. And right now, there was a ceasefire agreement, but the new leader of Boko Haram says he's rejecting the ceasefire and said, well, those schoolgirls, we can't return them because they're all gone. They converted to Islam and they were all married off, so we don't have the girls right now. So it seems very odd and strange that this all occurred once the ceasefire was implemented back in October, and now all of a sudden all the girls are completely gone from this area. Now, Morocco, they have been placed on high alert. Their military is on high alert amid labor unrest and threats by Al-Qaeda. The level of this alert is unprecedented, a source said. Moroccan sources said the army was mobilized to protect critical and government facilities throughout the North African Kingdom. They said soldiers were deployed throughout the capital and other major cities as part of what they termed a major security threat. But what we have to realize is every time we see a terror threat in any one of these countries, what do we know? Well, it's either China or Russia are making economic deals with these countries, or there's a huge amount of oil that was just discovered. Well, all of this is happening in Morocco. The oil discovery comes at a time when Morocco has reached a deadlock in matters of economic resources. Morocco faces the problem typical of developing countries, including heavy foreign indebtedness, acute joblessness, and slow, irregular growth. According to a World Bank statistics, Morocco's real growth rate was 0% in 1999. More than 13.1% of the country's 28 million people live below the poverty line. Unemployment is 23%, 55% of the population is illiterate, and Morocco owes international community $19.1 billion US dollars. And again, guess what happened? Morocco, they found oil. And they're saying it is a gift from heaven. And again, this oil should be dealt with cautiously and its revenues well exploited to avoid falling into the same trap as the Gulf countries that are now mere consumer of foreign products, he said. And this is coming from Benarmour from Morocco. And what we're seeing right now is that China has made a deal with Morocco. They obtained a $300 million loan from China Exim Bank to finance a 318 megawatt coal-fired plant in the eastern town of Jarada. And we also see Russia is now seeking to improve economic relations with Morocco. And all of a sudden, we have this terrorist alert going live here. The military is all on high alert, and we can see why. Oil, China, Russia, it is the same exact thing every single time. Now, China has unveiled an anti-drone laser weapon able to shoot down small aircraft within 5 seconds. The system is aimed at destroying unmanned, small-scale drones flying under an altitude of 500 meters at a speed below 50 meters per second. And they're saying that snipers and gunshots are not very accurate, and this is very accurate, and it can take down these drones. Now, it looks like NATO is basically having another drill in Lithuania. Servicemen from 9 NATO member states are taking part in nearly 2 weeks of military exercises in Lithuania. What used to be a national military drill has become a multinational NATO war game in response to events in neighboring Ukraine. 2,500 servicemen from Canada, the Czech Republic, Estonia, Hungary, Germany, Lithuania, Luxembourg, the UK, and the US are taking part in the Iron Sword 2014 military drill in Lithuania. And this is going to happen between November 2nd and November 14th. So we're going to have to watch this very, very carefully as the drill goes on here. In March, the U.S. deployed dozens of F-16 fighter jets and nearly 300 service personnel to Poland. And we're going to go basically what I'm doing is I'm going down a timeline of what's been happening in this area and all the military assets that have been reorganized and pushed into this area because of what's been happening with Ukraine. And as we know, all of this is being done because of World War III. Simultaneously, 4 American F-15 fighter jets were deployed to Lithuania in June. U.S. European Commander announced that about 100 instructors are set to train special op teams in former Soviet bloc states. In early September, following the NATO conference in Wales, the alliance shared plans to create a new rapid reaction force of at least 4,000 troops. It would be established in Eastern Europe, ready to be deployed within 48 hours. In October, news came that U.S. weaponry had arrived in Latvia. 150 soldiers used 5 M1A2 Abrams tanks, as well as 11 Bradley fighting vehicles in a training demonstration, and they're all going to be left in this area. In mid-October, U.S. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel declared that U.S. armed forces must deal with revisionist Russia with its modern and capable army on NATO's doorstep. So we can see right now they are definitely preparing, moving military assets into Eastern Europe, around China, because they are definitely preparing for World War III. And we can see from all this happening right now, NATO says a recent increase in flights by Russian aircraft over Europe has worked to send the Western military alliance a message that Russia now is beefing up and they're getting ready to do absolutely nothing. But of course, they're using the propaganda out there to convince everyone that Russia is building this up. They're flying closer to all these different countries. And again, they're all in international space. But again, they're using the propaganda and they're going to make it seem like Russia is doing something when they're really not. Just like they said Russia invaded Ukraine and they had all these satellite photos and they couldn't produce one of them. They had to give us those 1970 blurry black and whites with photoshopped images, which really never made sense. Basically what this says, and this is coming from General Philip Breedlove, the NATO Supreme Allied Commander, in my opinion, they're giving us a message. They're messaging us that they are a great power. The U.S. General said, and what you saw this past week was a larger, more complex formation of aircraft carrying out a little deeper, I would say a little bit more provocative flight path. United States has claimed the flights on October 29th constituted political saber-rattling and even Russian aggression. Under Article 5 of the NATO Charter, Russian aggression would provide a legal pretext for a U.S. military strike against Russia. So you can see what they're doing. They're continually building up the propaganda to convince everyone we are definitely going to be going to war with Russia. Now, Ukraine's GDP dropped by 7%. Their country is destroyed here. Currency is falling. They still have not paid for the gas yet. Yes, we're seeing deals are being made, but Kiev has not yet paid for Russian gas, but aims to do so in the near future, but they have not done it yet. And again, the deal is not binding until they actually make this payment, and we're still waiting. And I hate to say this, but Yatsenyuk has done this before, where he said he's going to pay the bill, and it never gets paid. And of course, they blame it on Russia, and we can see they might be doing the same thing once again. Now, what's very interesting, those residents of Crimea who got Russian passports on the peninsula will not be able to enter the territory of Ukraine with them, said the head of the Department of Border Control and Registration in the administration of the State Border Service of Ukraine. Citizens who got the documents there cannot enter the territory of Ukraine with them. These documents are invalid. Why? Because they don't believe Crimea was voted away, just like the southeastern section. And we can see right now, Ukraine is not happy about the voting that went on in the southeastern section of Lugansk and Donetsk, and Poroshenko saying Kiev not to ever recognize the elections in Donbass. Ukraine will never recognize the elections that took place in the self-proclaimed Donetsk and Lugansk region. Poroshenko warns of adequate reaction to elections in Donetsk and Lugansk. Ukraine's President Poroshenko has threatened to offer an adequate reaction to violations of the Ukrainian laws over the elections of the self-proclaimed region. These elections, according to Poroshenko, are flagrant violations of the Minsk Protocol of September 5th. But we have the Prime Minister of Donetsk and they out there saying that, well, we don't see it this way. And he said that the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic on Monday rejected the Ukraine's president's call to make void the results of Sunday's election in the republic, saying they were in line with the Minsk agreement on peace settlement. Pergin stressed that the vote does not run counter to the Minsk agreement that Kiev mentioned. He stressed the elections were held in the time bracket stipulated by the Minsk agreements. It said nowhere in the agreements that the elections must be held according to the rules that are dictated by Kiev. And again, here we are once again. Kiev is saying one thing, the southeastern section is saying the other, and the bankers are saying, listen, we didn't get what we paid for, so you're going after the southeastern region, and you're going after Crimea, and we're going to gin this war up once again. So now Poroshenko is out there, and he might abolish its law on special local governance in the Donetsk and Lugansk area. And the document on special local governance in the Donetsk and Lugansk regions signed by Poroshenko might be abolished, and he might just get rid of it, saying, you know what, this no longer holds because you violated the Minsk agreement. Of course, the southeastern section say we didn't violate the Minsk agreement. Now, Russia is stepping in, and they're saying they're urging Kiev to cancel the military operations in the southeastern part of Ukraine. There's drills going on, and they're saying just don't do this at this time. And of course, they're not going to listen. They're going to go ahead and do it. Now, a Ukrainian lawmaker who is also the leader of the volunteer battalion says brigades like his are ready to intrude into Russia to carry out attacks on Russian territory. He was being interviewed in Ukraine, and he made the remarks during the televised interview that they are ready to go ahead and invade the Russian Federation, break into it with reconnaissance detachments and sabotage groups. So we can see they are definitely getting ready to do something. They're ready to go full blast into this, and by everything that's happening right now, they're blaming the southeastern section. They're saying the deal is null and void, and they're ramping up their military forces, and we're seeing it start right now, and we're going to follow this very closely as time goes on. Now, as we know, in the Middle East, things are really falling apart rapidly. We understand that the United States is continually bombing with the coalition. It's not doing anything because they're not really hitting the Islamic State. But what's very interesting, and we said this a way back, that Al-Qaeda is kind of disappearing and everything's becoming the Islamic State. And what we're seeing right now is the Islamic State is maneuvering. Of course, this is the proxy army of the United States, the UK, Israel, and our other Arab nations, because of the problems in Lebanon, in Libya, in Yemen. They need to go back into these countries because the people are rising up and they're kicking out their puppet regimes. So right now, the Islamic State has been engaged in its biggest campaign in Lebanon. There's about 500 Islamic State fighters that maneuvered their way into Lebanon, and they're fighting against the government there. So you can see how they're setting this up. They said the Islamic State deployed mortars, rocket-propelled grenades, and machine guns in a 4-day battle with the Lebanese army. And they're saying that, see, the Islamic State is in here trying to form a caliphate, and this is perfect for the United States and the coalition, because wherever the Islamic State is, that's where the United States will be allowed to go, and this is how they're going to re-enter all of these countries to reestablish the puppet governments. Now, in Iraq, we understand there's a lot of things going on. We have the Islamic State, which is creating chaos in the country. We also have the people rising up trying to take back their country. So we have a couple things going on there. But what's happening is, as we know, there's a division headquarters that is set up that can support between 10 and 30,000 military soldiers, and this is being set up by the United States. And right now it looks like Iraqi security forces, backed by the American-led air power and hundreds of advisors, are planning a major spring offensive against the Islamic State fighters, but the push will require training of about 20,000 troops. Now, where are they going to get 20,000 troops for this Arab Spring? One senior U.S. official, who asked not to be identified, but of course, said it was likely that the number would need to be raised. Army planners have drafted options that could deploy up to additional 3,500 people to expand the advisory effort. So it looks like already they're bringing in some more advisors, which are basically combat-ready Marines, and we can see already they're trying to bring more and more of these advisors in, and before you know it, there'll be 20,000. And this is called mission creep, and we're seeing it played out continually on and on. Now, it looks like the Islamic State, again, captured American high-tech weapons. Now, they did an airdrop, and it looks like the Islamic State got the weapons, and now it seems that they got the weapons from the moderates. Rebel groups backed and armed by the U.S. has just been wiped out, and all the arms and bases have been taken by the Islamic State. Now again, here we are once again. The Islamic State is a proxy army. We have to go back in time. We have to remember the Islamic State and the Free Syrian Army really one and the same. They made an agreement that they're both going to go after Assad. They're not going to fight each other. So we can see that this is really taking place right now, where the Free Syrian Army is basically just giving them the weapons. Also, when the Syrian army destroys the Free Syrian Army, guess what happens? The Islamic State comes in and takes those weapons, and they fight against the Syrian army. So we can see how this is all being played out right now. And again, everything the United States and the coalition that they're doing there with France, with Canada, with the Arab nations, all of it is not to destroy the Islamic State. All of it is meant to destroy the infrastructure of Syria. They're destroying their pipelines, they're destroying their oil fields, they're destroying their refineries, they're destroying the infrastructure inside the cities, the air bases. They're doing everything they possibly can before they bring in troops into the region. And we can see they're definitely setting this up, and we're going to have to watch this. Now, I do believe once these elections are over tomorrow, we're going to see events really pick up, and we're going to have to watch this very, very carefully. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.